assuming that if you do have this pilot, that in conjunction with the use of tasers, you would also have defibrillators available. Can you explain to me how that works and why there's a need to do that?
It was one of the recommendations that came out of the physician, the cardiologist with the University of California, San Francisco, was that if we are to deploy an electronic control weapon system, it should be done in conjunction, or the availability, I should say, with a defibrillator should be immediate. And with that said, the department is also moving forward with community members who want to see, independent of the taser issue, it's something that actually was a part of the discussion before July when Chief Sir brought this issue up, was there was a discussion already about adopting a police car, donating an AED, and having that AED device available in the police car at no cost to the city for a period of 6 years.
Can you explain to me what, or to any member of the audience or people who are watching, what a defibrillator is?
I'm looking around to see if I see one. In most of our buildings, we have them dispersed, within the police department, and certainly within City Hall, we have them. It's basically for an individual who has a heart stoppage, and basically you place the device on the chest of the person, and that device measures all the activity of that person's body and applies a charge to start the heart if necessary. It's not a choice that the officer or the operator should say makes.
And see, for me, the fact that you need a defibrillator points to the underlying danger here, that if tasers are so safe, why do you need to have a defibrillator available?
It was the recommendation that came from one doctor, although there's not a single, there's one case out of Arizona where the medical examiner has identified taser as being the cause of death. Every single case, there are a multitude of issues surrounding the custody death, but not one that's been identified as being caused by electronic control. But with that said, it's a matter of what safeguards can we put in place in the event that one is used and there is an issue with a heart stoppage.
And that's my point. I mean, defibrillation, as I understand it, is the treatment of life-threatening cardiac arrest and life-threatening. So if we're talking about trying to replace a lethal weapon, a gun, with a non-lethal weapon, we're talking about replacing a gun with a taser where, because of the potential lethality of it, you actually have to have this instrument available in the event that there is a life-threatening incident. That's the problem that I have, is that it's, in theory, even if you agree with the concept that you replace a life-threatening instrument or tool with something that is non-life-threatening, I don't know that we have that here, because we're talking about, a doctor saying you need to have this instrument available. In terms of liability, I think that we probably would have a big issue of liability if that wasn't available. And so there is, it's not like we're replacing a gun with something that is non-lethal, really, potentially. It potentially could be lethal. And so that, to me, the fact that you have to have this instrument tells you the danger. Thank you.
Commissioner Sfpd.
Yeah, I guess I think that you really gave the best argument for why it's so important to really encourage and continue to strengthen the CIT program. Because, definitely, I think that's where our resources should go. So rather than train 103 people and then have to invest in that additional weapon, and even though it's supposed to be donated, there's still things that we would have to pay for. Then I think those resources should be definitely going into a different conversation around mental health crisis. And I think that's what disturbs me most about this, that we went there. That we went to, rather than talking about how we strengthen CIT, how we train everyone in the police department to make sure it's just part of the curriculum on how to respond to somebody who's in a mental health crisis mode, which I believe to be a public safety issue, yes, but I believe it's also a public health issue. And I visited a couple of occasions the site board of SF General and have talked to a lot of the folks there who deal with people in those extreme situations. But I think we also read more when the economy was failing. A lot of folks who never had any history of mental health crisis or illness had a lot of moments where they reached a mental health crisis just over the stress of the economic stresses and stresses in their life. So I guess ultimately what I'm saddened by is that we're here in one of the most progressive cities in the world, allegedly, and we know we have a population who, you know, in all cities really, we have populations of people who, with or without a history, may reach a mental health crisis situation, and that the conversation goes to taser use rather than reevaluating and reflecting on how we can create a culture that has to do more with a different type of crisis intervention. So I guess the idea of the weapon, continuing to go down that path of using the weapon is not a conversation that is a good conversation to be, is a healthy conversation to be having in the city. That's all. And I thank you for your work on the CIT, and I trust your work, and you do really good work. And I just hope we get to a point where everyone in the department can have that training that is more than 4 times a year, that is just, again, part of the curriculum, and that we have this different conversation about how we engage with people who are in that state.
Mr. Supervisor, just to assure you, we are having that conversation. If you look at the fact that our department deals with over 4,000 non-involuntary commitments to San Francisco Psychiatric Services through 5150 holds, we also deal with a significant amount of numbers of diversions. We have the policy with the door clinic where a number of our officers, when we see a person who's potentially at the cusp of being either a threat to themselves or others, there's an intervention that allows us to not allow that to go any further, become a criminal issue, become a psychiatric hold issue, and we divert those persons to door clinic. The important thing also is that a significant number of our calls for service relative to persons who do have a mental health illness issue and who are in a state of crisis come from the medical practitioners themselves. I mean, we're talking about not the identification of the person, but the identification of the behavior. The behavior has gone from a person who is managing some mental illness to a person who is now a threat potentially to themselves and others. And when they become a threat to others, that's when the medical professionals call us. And it's that point we have to recognize that words do not always work. The words of trying to capture the attention of someone who's in crisis does not always work. If the medical professionals have difficulty doing it, who have a multitude of years of degrees behind themselves in training, surely we can't expect our officers to always be able to offer the words that's going to connect with the person who's in crisis and keep them from going into a position of danger to others. When that takes place, our officers need to be equipped with the available tools in order to lessen the
I like to keep the audience here respectful of people's speaking at the podium. It's just something that's a rule we have here, and I think respectful. Everyone should be able to take part in. Also, I ask that we do not clap, so I hope that you can continue to refrain from that. Thank you.
And I guess, and I thank you for that, but I guess finally, as a lay person, I guess, when we read about some of these situations, that involve, I guess, box cutters and other things, it's kind of hard to understand. And at some point, I guess I should, do my own sort of exploration of this, how it escalates from that to someone dying, so being shot.
Supervisor, I've seen people who were deceased as a result of box cutters.
Okay, I'm just saying. Thank you.